A black woman arrives at court for her first day as chief judge, only to be blocked at the door by officers who refuse to believe she belongs. Their blind obedience to procedure turns into a public humiliation that shocks everyone watching. But when Maya Ellison finds her voice, she flips the moment and the system on its head. By the end, the same door that shut her out becomes the symbol of a justice finally restored. The courthouse smelled of polished marble and old paper, the kind of smell that whispered authority. Morning light cut through the front plaza, glinting off badge metal and glass panels. At precisely 8:42 a.m., Maya Ellison climbed the courthouse steps with her briefcase in one hand and a folder pressed against her chest. The city was just waking up, car doors slamming, a siren in the distance, heels tapping on concrete. She had been coming to this building for over 15 years, but today was the first time the door didn't open for her. A metallic click echoed as the security lock engaged, and a uniformed hand came up, steady, impersonal, practiced. "Courts for litigants and staff only," said Sergeant Daniel Cole, his tone clipped but not hostile. The sunlight struck his badge, turning it into a mirror that caught Maya's reflection for a heartbeat. A woman in a navy blue suit, calm, composed, yet suddenly small before the barrier. Maya raised her chin slightly. "I am staff," she said, offering her bar card with a quiet authority that should have been enough. Behind her, the line of visitors shifted. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Curiosity, impatience, that low public hum of something unusual happening. Someone coughed. Someone else lifted a phone. Cole didn't look at the card. He turned to his partner, Officer Jenna Ramirez, a young officer still finding confidence in uniform. Ramirez's eyes swept Maya up and down, the soft curls at her temples, the modest earrings, the well-worn leather briefcase. Her gaze lingered just a moment too long, like she was waiting for something that would make sense of the scene. "Photo ID?" Ramirez asked, voice level but cautious. "Government issued," she added, almost automatically, as if reading from a script. Maya opened her wallet, movement slow and deliberate. Inside was her driver's license, her court ID, and the credentials of a woman who had spent decades earning every letter that followed her name. She extended it towards them, expecting recognition, but Cole stepped forward, blocking the gesture. "Ma'am, you can't bring that bag in," he said, eyes on her briefcase. "And this entrance is for employees. You'll need to use the public line." For a second, Maya thought she hadn't heard right. "The public line?" she repeated, her voice carefully even. Across the plaza, she could see the separate queue snaking around the building, a slow shuffle of defendants, witnesses, and worried relatives. At that very moment, a court clerk, coffee in one hand, pastry in the other, breezed past security without a glance. The scanner beeped approvingly. No questions asked. Maya's grip tightened on her briefcase. She took a breath, held it, and tried again. "I have docket at 9, courtroom 3. Cole's expression didn't change. His hand rested on the door handle, palm pressing down just enough to remind her who controlled access. "Court rules," he said, simply. That was when the air changed. The kind of silence that only comes when injustice enters a public space. The line behind her had stopped moving. A man in a denim jacket frowned. A woman whispered to her friend, "She looks familiar." A teenager filming muttered, "Isn't that Judge Ellison?" Another voice, lower, incredulous, "New chief, right?" The officers didn't look up. They didn't react at all. Maya stood there, the morning sun warming one side of her face, her pulse loud in her ears. She wasn't just locked out of a building, she was locked out of her own authority. Every second stretched thin, heavy with the quiet rage that comes when dignity is tested in daylight. Cole adjusted his belt, a subtle signal that the conversation was over. Ramirez shifted uneasily, glancing between Maya and the gathering crowd. The camera light blinked red. Someone was recording. And still, no one opened the door. For a heartbeat, Maya considered explaining again, spelling it out, demanding recognition. But the thought tasted bitter. She lowered her wallet, straightened her shoulders, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence is louder than protest. The anger wasn't in her words. It was in the stillness. The kind of anger that builds when every polite correction is ignored. The kind that doesn't explode, it waits. And while the officers looked past her, Maya Ellison looked at the courthouse doors. The same doors where she'd once sworn her oath, and thought, with a calm sharper than fury, "You're about to learn who's standing in front of you." Maya Ellison had imagined difficult mornings before, flooded dockets, late filings, a juror's outburst, but never this. Never standing in front of a courthouse door that refused to recognize her. She'd known deep down that a day like this might come. Still, she had hoped it wouldn't arrive today, her first morning as chief judge of the district. For months, she had prepared for this role, not for its prestige, but for its work. She wasn't there for ribbon cuttings or handshakes. She had plans, real plans. She wanted to reform bail procedures that punished the poor, to create a pilot program that gave mental health defendants care instead of cells, to stop forcing arraignments at midnight when the system was too tired to be fair. She'd built her life on the belief that justice could evolve if enough people showed up early, stayed late, and refused to accept that's just how it is. Now, she was 15 feet from her chambers, and a locked door was asking her to prove she belonged. She'd grown up in Cleveland, the daughter of a teacher and a postal worker who told her she could be anything, as long as she outworked everyone. And she had. Law school honors, public defender's office, 10 years on the trial bench. Every title had been earned the hard way, every doubt met with precision, every insult answered with achievement. But the unspoken truth of her profession was that some doubts never disappeared. They just wore better suits. Across from her, Sergeant Daniel Cole and Officer Jenna Ramirez were not villains. They were two people doing their job, or at least their version of it. Cole's stance was firm, professional, but beneath that steel posture lived something older, a quiet fear of making the wrong call. Last week, a man with a forged press badge had slipped through another courthouse checkpoint and attacked a prosecutor. Cole had read the report twice, each line heavy with the phrase security oversight. Since then, he had promised himself he'd never be the one who let something slide. Not once, not ever. Jenna Ramirez was newer to the job, younger, her uniform still stiff from the press of training. Her eyes darted between Maya and the growing line behind her. She had a newborn at home, a husband who worked nights, and a supervisor who graded tight compliance higher than common sense. She didn't mean to doubt Maya, she just couldn't risk being wrong. "Judge Ellison?" Ramirez said softly, as if testing a myth. The name sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, like a borrowed word from a language she didn't speak. "Your badge?" Maya tried to keep her voice steady, even as her pulse quickened. It was reprinted after yesterday's swearing in, the courier's late. She hated how calm she sounded, professional, factual, while humiliation burned quietly beneath her ribs. The truth was simple, the consequences were not. A delay in paperwork had turned her identity into a question mark. Ramirez hesitated. Cole crossed his arms. Neither moved. Behind them, the courthouse doors gleamed, the same doors Maya had walked through hundreds of times as "Your Honor." But that morning, somehow, those words weren't enough. The building didn't see her title. It only saw what it expected not to see in it. Out of the corner of her eye, Maya noticed a clerk emerge from the security checkpoint, powdered sugar dusting his sleeve. He froze when he recognized her, the faint spark of recognition flashing across his face. For a second, she thought he would speak, say something, do something. But instead, his eyes dropped. He adjusted his pastry bag and walked away, head down, pretending not to notice the tension unfolding a few feet from him. That was the part that always stung the most. Not the confrontation, but the silence of witnesses. People who knew better but chose comfort over courage. Maya straightened her shoulders. Her throat felt tight, her breath shallow. The officers' uniforms gleamed under the morning sun. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the courthouse glass, caught between the inside she'd earned and the outside she couldn't cross. For a brief moment, she wondered how many others had stood where she was now, at the edge of belonging, armed with credentials that somehow never counted enough. The pain wasn't just personal, it was generational, the echo of a question asked too many times. What else do I have to prove? And yet, even in that moment of quiet defeat, she didn't let her anger speak for her. She pressed her lips together, drew a breath, and waited. Because Maya Ellison had long ago, the hardest weight to carry was not what people saw. It was what they never even tried to understand. The pain wasn't in the argument. It was in the pause that followed, the invisible moment when truth stood waiting, and no one opened the door. The crowd had thickened now. A tide of morning traffic turned spectators. Phones hovered midair like a forest of glass eyes. The courthouse steps had become a stage, and Maya Ellison, still outside its doors, stood at its center. She exhaled once, slow and controlled. "Call the court administrator," she said, her voice steady as a judge delivering a ruling. "Or Marshal O'Neill. He has my cell." Sergeant Cole didn't flinch, his jaw set like stone. "We don't call personal numbers," he said, each word crisp, rehearsed, the armor of a man clinging to protocol. Maya tilted her head slightly, the faintest flicker of disbelief passing across her face. "You do," she replied, her tone shifting, firm, low, commanding. "When a judge orders you." That broke the stillness. A few people in line murmured, uncertain whether to be impressed or afraid. Cole's expression hardened. "Then produce the order," he shot back, his words sparking against hers like flint against steel. The tension between them was electric, two forms of authority colliding, one institutional, one earned. Before Maya could answer, a voice cut through the air. "Judge Ellison!" A man jogged up the steps, files clutched to his chest, his tie crooked from the rush. Ethan Ward, a public defender, known for his restless energy and relentless clients, stopped beside her, breathless. "They're holding my clients upstairs," he said quickly, then turned to the officers. "This is the chief judge. What are you doing?" Cole lifted a hand, palm out, pressing lightly against Ethan's chest. "Sir, step back," he ordered, his voice sharper now, tension spilling through the seams of professionalism. The onlookers murmured louder, confusion mixing with indignation. One person whispered, "They really don't know who she is." Another, "This is going viral." And then, a sound from behind the glass. Inside the vestibule, a gray-haired woman in a bailiff's uniform froze mid-step. Ruth McCready. 30 years in court service, a face every judge knew and every clerk respected. She blinked once, twice, recognizing Maya immediately. Her hand trembled just slightly as she pressed the intercom. "Sergeant," Ruth said, voice clear through the speaker, "open the door. That is Chief Judge Maya Ellison." A pause, a faint buzz. Hope stirred like wind in dry leaves. But Cole's hand stayed on the handle, unmoving. "With respect, bailiff," he replied, the stiffness in his voice betraying unease. "Confirmation must come from security command." He was trapped, not by arrogance this time, but fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of bending a rule that might cost him his badge. He looked at Maya, at the growing crowd, and at the camera lens recording his every hesitation. Maya's tone softened, not out of mercy, but precision. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I know you were on the Garner case last year. You testified with professionalism. I read your transcript." That caught him off guard. The fact that she knew him, remembered his record. His shoulders shifted. The wall of his confidence cracked. "There's a portrait in the lobby," Maya continued. Draped in cloth for an unveiling I didn't ask for. Pull the drape. If it's me, we end this now. If not, I'll wait in the public line. Her words carried no anger now, only the weight of logic, grace sharpened into truth. Ramirez looked from Maya to Cole, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. The officer's hand hovered over the radio mic, hesitating for a heartbeat before pressing it down. Control, this is Officer Ramirez. Verify request from Chief Judge Maya Ellison. Static crackled. A distant voice answered. Ramirez glanced toward the lobby camera feed, listening to muffled confirmation. Then, with a short breath, she keyed another command. Inside the lobby, the curtain shifted. At first, it was just a whisper of fabric, then the full sweep of cloth falling away in a slow, deliberate wave. Beneath it, the portrait emerged. Maya Ellison, robed in black, gaze forward, the new chief judge of the district court. The crowd saw it first. A murmur rose, spreading through the vestibule and out across the steps. Disbelief turning into recognition, recognition turning into something else. A sound like paper rustling, voices swelling, cameras clicking. Maya didn't move. She just stood there, silent, as the truth unfolded in plain view. Cole's hand, once firm on the door, trembled just slightly. The line between authority and error had never felt thinner. And for the first time that morning, hope, real, grounded hope, began to breathe again. For a long moment, no one spoke. The portrait in the lobby glowed softly under the morning light, the gold frame catching every whisper of movement outside. Sergeant Cole stared at it, at the face that mirrored the woman standing before him. And the silence grew so complete that even the faint hum of the security scanner seemed deafening. Then came the voice that broke it. "Open it," said Ruth McCready. She was already walking toward the vestibule, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. Cole's jaw tightened. His thumb hovered, then pressed against the latch. The mechanism clicked, not loudly, but with a sigh, like a held breath finally released. The heavy courthouse door swung open, letting in a rush of air that smelled of paper, coffee, and the nervous ozone of busy mornings. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Maya Ellison stepped forward. Not quickly, not with anger, but with the deliberate poise of someone reclaiming what should have never been taken. Her heels clicked once, twice, the sound landing like punctuation marks on the marble floor. The crowd fell silent as she crossed the threshold, the camera still watching but forgotten. Cole swallowed, his hand twitching toward a salute that never fully formed. "Your Honor, Sergeant," Maya interrupted gently, her tone calm but edged with finality. "We're going to fix this, so the next black woman who walks up to this door isn't asked to prove she exists." Her words didn't accuse, they defined. They turned the humiliation into policy, into purpose. She turned to Officer Ramirez, whose face had gone pale beneath her cap. "Officer, find Security Command. Have them join me in Conference Room B." Ramirez nodded, the radio trembling in her hand as she relayed the order. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though a few lingered, watching the chief judge walk through the courthouse she now led. Within minutes, word of what had happened rippled through the building. A bailiff whispered it to a clerk to a reporter, and before the hour had turned, every corridor hummed with the story. The chief judge had been stopped at the door. By the time Maya reached Conference Room B, the table was already filling. Judges emerged from their chambers, robes half-draped, expressions uneasy. The court administrator arrived, face flushed and apologetic, trailed by the presiding marshal whose boots echoed too loudly in the tense quiet. Maya took her seat at the head of the table, her demeanor collected, her mind already dissecting the morning like a case file. This was not the time for anger, not anymore. She turned to Officer Ramirez, whose face had gone pale beneath her cap. "Officer, find Security Command. Have them join me in conference room B." Ramirez nodded, the radio trembling in her hand as she relayed the order. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though a few lingered, watching the chief judge walk through the courthouse she now led. Within minutes, word of what had happened rippled through the building. A bailiff whispered it to a clerk to a reporter, and before the hour had turned, every corridor hummed with the story. The chief judge had been stopped at the door. By the time Maya reached conference room B, the table was already filling. Judges emerged from their chambers, robes half-draped, expressions uneasy. The court administrator arrived, face flushed and apologetic, trailed by the presiding marshal, whose boots echoed too loudly in the tense quiet. Maya took her seat at the head of the table, her demeanor collected, her mind already dissecting the morning like a case file. This was not the time for anger, not anymore. "First," she began, her tone even but heavy with authority, "it's an operational failure review." She listened more than she spoke. Every explanation revealed another fault line. Outdated photo databases, inconsistent ID rules, discretionary screenings at employee entrances. Policies that claimed neutrality but worked like mirrors, reflecting comfort for some, suspicion for others. When the room fell silent, Maya stood, taking a marker to the whiteboard. The squeak of ink filled the pause between sentences. "First," she said, "any judge or officer of the court can be verified through the clerk's registry within 60 seconds. No exceptions. Second, entry is based on function, not appearance. That includes visiting counsel, clerks, and staff under judicial appointment. Third, implicit bias training will be attached to every quarterly security drill." She turned, meeting every pair of eyes in the room. "This isn't about blame, it's about prevention. If we can recognize a pattern, we can break it." The marshal nodded, the administrator scribbled notes, and even the older judges, the ones less accustomed to being corrected, stayed silent, watching her with a new kind of respect. Finally, she added one last point, the ink underlining her words. "Temporary judicial badges will carry a red stripe, a visible mark of authority during transitions. So what happened today," she paused, "will never happen again." When the meeting ended, Maya gathered her files and returned to the front entrance. The hallway seemed brighter now, the marble lighter under her steps. Outside, Cole and Ramirez were still stationed at their post, posture straight, faces subdued but open. Maya approached them with the same composure she'd carried all morning. In front of the few remaining onlookers and the camera still quietly filming, she extended her hand. Cole hesitated only for a second before taking it. His grip was firm, his voice low. "I was wrong," he said. Then, glancing briefly at Ramirez, added, "We were wrong." Maya nodded once, her eyes steady. "You were thorough," she said softly. "Be thorough and fair." The words landed with the weight of both command and forgiveness. Then she turned to the people still waiting in the public line. With a calm smile and a raised voice that carried through the hall, she said simply, "Court's open." The murmurs faded, the crowd began to move, and the rhythm of the courthouse resumed. Papers rustling, doors closing, justice proceeding. It wasn't loud, this victory. It was quiet, deliberate, and absolute. Because sometimes triumph isn't in celebration. It's in the moment a locked door opens and never closes the same way again. By 10 o'clock, the courthouse had found its rhythm again. The hallways, once buzzing with whispers and tension, now hummed with the familiar cadence of justice in motion. Paper sliding, doors clicking shut, footsteps echoing down marble corridors. The docket moved, cases were called, voices rose and fell in the courtroom like tides. Ethan Ward, still catching his breath from the chaos of the morning, stood beside his clients, two young men who'd spent the weekend in holding. Within an hour, they saw daylight instead of concrete. Paperwork flowed, signatures landed, and the small machinery of fairness, fragile but persistent, began to turn again. In a rare pause between hearings, Maya glanced toward the lobby through the glass pane beside her bench. Her newly unveiled portrait stood there, framed in oak and sunlight. The painted version of herself stared back, stern, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The artist had caught her likeness, but not her exhaustion. She studied it for a moment. It didn't feel like a crown, or even an honor. It felt like a warning. Leadership, she thought, isn't what happens on camera. It's what happens after, in the policies, the habits, the quiet choices no one applauds. That afternoon, a ripple of small changes began to unfold. Sergeant Cole sat at his desk typing an incident memo that would become required reading in the security division. For the first time in his career, he didn't sand down the truth. He wrote plainly about the hesitation, the bias, the moment he realized what he had done. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. Officer Ramirez, meanwhile, stood at her locker, peeling the backing from a small yellow post-it note. She pressed it just below her name tag. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. Check the reason, not the face. The word stayed there, a quiet promise to herself and to whoever might look over her shoulder next. Ruth McCready, the silver-haired bailiff who had spoken up when others froze, returned to her post with a small, proud smile. The kind that didn't ask for recognition but earned it anyway. When she passed through the vestibule that afternoon, the officer stood a little taller. Doors opened faster. Greetings carried warmth. And the young clerk, the one who had looked away that morning, pastry sugar still on his cuff, found Maya during a short recess. He stopped in front of her, nerves twisting his voice. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything," he admitted quietly, "when I saw it happen." Maya turned, met his eyes, and smiled, not with triumph, but with understanding. "Speak next time," she said softly, "not for me, for whoever can't." He nodded, the weight of that sentence landing deeper than any reprimand could. By the end of the week, the changes were visible. A courier delivered a stack of small red-striped badges, the new temporary credentials for judges and officers. Security practiced the new call and confirm protocol until it became second nature. The signs at the entrance were replaced. Employee entry, authorized by roll, not by recognition. And on Monday morning, the true test arrived. A young black attorney named Darlene Price approached the employee entrance, balancing a stack of case files in a cup of coffee. It was her first week in the building. She moved carefully, that quiet caution that often accompanies competence, the fear of being mistaken for someone out of place. Before she could reach for her wallet, Officer Ramirez smiled and pulled the door open. "Good morning, counselor," she said. "Welcome in." Darlene blinked, surprised, then smiled back, a small, grateful smile that didn't need words. She stepped inside, the marble floor shining under her shoes, the door closing softly behind her. Some victories make headlines, fiery, fleeting, loud. The better ones don't. They live in the quiet corrections, in the retrained habit, in the pause before judgment. They take root not in applause, but in routine. And in a courthouse where, not long ago, a chief judge had been asked to prove who she was, the habit finally changed. Justice, once again, began with the simplest act, opening the door.